Okay, hello everyone. Michael here. I am sitting down with my colleague and co-host and pal Moriah, who we were talking, or we talk all the time, but recently we were talking, and I realized that Moriah is the only person on the editorial team who received her MFA, went for an MFA program, and as an editorial team, something that I think we all love is that our backgrounds are so different and our writing styles and reading habits are so different. And this just conjured up a lot of interesting conversation. And so we thought we would sit down today and talk to you a little bit about the pros and cons of an MFA program. If you are an undecided, soon to be graduate, this maybe will help you. It's a conversation that I wish I had heard when I was graduating, because I think it would have better helped me make a decision that may or may not have had a pretty big impact on my life.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I think that when we were discussing what we wanted or envisioned for this episode, the first thing that came into my mind is that when I was in my undergraduate degree, I got my Bachelor of Arts
Mm-hmm.
in creative writing and also in English literature. And my dad's dream for me was that I was going to be the weather girl on Channel 8.
Oh,
So when I told him that I wanted to go and study writing, that was a total departure. And he said, I will help you financially with school. You can study whatever you want, but I need you to give me a clear path for
mm,
how this will help you financially in the future.
wow.
Because I think that for a lot of us, when we tell our parents that we want to be artists, the starving artist is the first thing that they think of, right?
Yeah.
So when I was in school, I really didn't know what path I wanted to take. I knew I wanted to write,
Yeah.
and I knew I loved it and I was good at it, but I didn't know what exactly that looked like.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, hey, you know, an MFA
Mm-hmm.
is a continuation of this process. So I went right from undergrad into my MFA program, which can be a little bit atypical depending on what program you go to. Generally, people take like 2 or 3 years between, their first degree and their master's. But not always. We
Sure.
had people in our program who hadn't been in school for many, many years. But I guess my first question to you is, I know that you were thinking about this kind of program
Mm-hmm.
when you were in undergrad. So what was an MFA to you? What were your expectations around it? Or, what did you think the program would potentially get you or
Mm-hmm.
not get you?
Totally. I love the way you put that. Growing up, I'm going to backtrack a little bit with some inside Michael's brain, which was I also I knew I loved stories. I knew I loved telling them and reading them and watching them and listening to them. I didn't immediately know that I wanted to go into English literature. I thought I wanted to be a film student. And when I went to I went to school undecided because I had transferred to a different school and I just missed the opportunity to apply to the film school. And in that period of being technically undecided, I just kind of tried to think about what it is about film that I loved. And it was always ultimately the story. And I just realized it doesn't have to be film. I'm actually a voracious reader and maybe I want to be a writer. And I was really nervous to tell my parents, which was insane because my mother was a librarian. But I remember calling them from the car once and was just like, I think I decided what I want to major in. And I think it's creative writing. And my mom was like, yeah, that makes sense. And I was like, oh, thank God. Like, okay, cool. You're cool with this. And I'm so grateful. I'm so glad it was the best decision I could have made at such a young age. And then heading into graduating with my bachelor's, MFA programs weren't really talked about a ton. And they were always talked kind of around. And my teachers all, of course, had MFAs. And it was always kind of a throwaway statement like, well, if you get your MFA, this, this, this. Or when you go get your MFA, you'll this, this, this. and it was never in line with what I pictured for my career, because I knew I didn't want to be a teacher, and that's kind of the sort of the main sentiment was, if you want to continue to write and teach, then you need to have an MFA program, go into an MFA program. It just never felt right for me, and I think it was truly just because I lacked information on it, and also because I knew I did not want to teach. And I was about to graduate. My good friend Justine McNulty immediately went into an MFA as well. And we were sitting having coffee with a friend who also had gotten into this MFA program. And I think there was just an assumption that I had also applied and was going. And I didn't think anything of it. I just said, no, actually, I'm not going for an MFA. And the third friend was like, well, you're never going to get a job then. You're never going to be a writer. And I was like, oh, really? Like, why do you say that?
Gee, thanks.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, I think I'm good. Actually, like, I have an interview set up for a writing job. And it's just because I think the image of what that looks like for a lot of young writers is very understandably romantic. And I was heading into a more professional, like, editorial world that I was comfortable going for, while also writing creatively on my own. The stuff that I didn't consider was, my stuff will still be workshopped. I'll be writing really often. I'll be learning about different styles and just getting better at my craft, possibly. So my knowledge of an MFA program really stopped and started with that it meant I was going to be able to teach, and that would offer me time to write more.
And I think that is something that a lot of undergrad programs fail to realize, is that, I do believe that the MFA is generally packaged as this next step to teaching. Mm-hmm. And certainly it can be, but it's also a lot more than that. And right. I do want to just put in a little caveat here that I am not an expert in MFAs. I have gone to a single program. I've not taught in an MFA. I've not been a director of an MFA. I've not ever been a professor in any kind of program. But once you're in an MFA, it's this very strange culture where you talk to people from other programs, and it's like each one is its own little world. Mm-hmm. And the more that you reach out to people who have gotten MFAs and the more that you compare experiences, there are radically different experiences and there are very similar ones. And part of that is also depends on where you go to school, right? So I went to school in Philadelphia. I lived in Chinatown. I had a very different experience than my friend who's currently getting her MFA in poetry, and she's going to school in New York City, and she's living in the Bronx. And it's just a very different style, not to mention that she's getting her MFA during COVID. Right. So all of these things really change the way that your MFA program, you experience your MFA program. But I do want to talk just a little bit about what an MFA is. Yes, because please. What I heard from you is that you thought, well, this is either the only way that I can be a quote unquote successful writer, right? Or it's the only way that I can be a teacher.
Yes.
So the weird thing about an MFA, first of all, it stands for a Master of Fine Arts, which is different from another master's program because an MFA is more craft focused, while a master's is much more analytical. So in a master of, say you want to get a master in creative writing, you're going to spend a lot more time reading and analyzing those works, kind of the way that you do in an English class. Okay. Where in an MFA you spend more time, like you said, that you didn't realize is that you spend a lot more time writing, doing your own creative works, which is what I actually went to get my MFA for, because I just felt like as I was nearing graduation, I was not willing to leave the bubble. When you're in that space where you have deadlines and you
Yes.
have very strict expectations for what you need to be writing and when. It keeps you focused fully on your craft. And I wanted to meet more writers.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a very small campus in rural Pennsylvania, and it was very white.
Mm.
And I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, which was very white. And I thought, if I get to go and be in a city and be in a city program, you know, I'm going to meet so many writers who have different life experiences
Sure.
than me. I was also closeted until my MFA program, so it gave me more confidence, more like I was able to really write the things that I wanted to write and feel comfortable doing that. But of course, I didn't really know any of that when I was applying, right? Because the MFA is, it's about 2 to 3 years, depending on what program you're applying to. And they do specify on their websites. It's not like a surprise. And it's also a terminal degree, so there is no PhD in fine arts. When you go for your MFA, you kind of know that that's going to be the end of the academic line for you.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, this will give me 2 or 3 years of writing, and then I'll have to, quote unquote, enter the real world, you know, start adulting. And there.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So in all of this, I guess what was your goal outside of that? Like in terms of entering the real world, was part of that wanting to teach? Or did you want any of that?
I honestly had no idea.
Sure, yeah, of course.
I was open to it, but I thought it would buy me some more time to really decide what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it did lead me to editing.
Of course.
And that's because, so the structure of an MFA program, every program is different. The number of credits you have to take is different. Of course, if you go to a 3-year program, they require more credit hours than a 2-year program, yada, yada. But there is a general structure, right? So you get 1 workshop a semester, and a workshop is when you are writing and having other people review your work. I just realized that I didn't specify that an MFA program is not just for people who got their BA in, or a BA at all. It usually has to have some kind of undergraduate degree.
But it doesn't have to be.
Right. You don't have to have, quote unquote, been a writer in school. You know, you could go and get a degree in engineering.
Right.
Or study public policy. You could have gone and gotten your PhD in, you know, economics, and you can still apply to MFA programs. They are open to all writers. So back to the workshop. The workshop is where you are presenting your work to a class and having them respond to it. We'll get into more of that later, but the next kind of part of the MFA program is that there are a number of craft, manuscript, or special topics courses. Those are all different words for the same thing.
Okay.
So you probably took craft courses in your undergraduate degree. It's basically just an exploration of a specific topic. So for example, my program had a flash fiction craft course. And that was the first time that I ever was exposed to or wrote flash fiction. Because in my earlier academic years, we studied longer short stories or full manuscripts. For what we called the special topics class, that was a class that was only offered once every 2 years. And that was a journal editing class. So that is how I actually got a lot of my experience that I use in my day job here at Writer's Digest, because we had to make our own literary magazine from scratch. And I had the opportunity in that class to apply and become the editor-in-chief of Tinge Literary Magazine.
Nice.
which is based in Philadelphia. And so, you get a whole bunch of different experiences with those craft classes. Then the next part of the program is generally a number of elective classes. And this is where every program really splits off.
Okay.
Some universities allow you to take electives in courses that are not in your area. So, for example, you might have been able to take film classes as an MFA candidate if your university had those classes offered and allowed you to commingle, right?
Right.
It was one of those things where I had my English literature degree, but I was not prepared for a master's level English lit course.
Yeah.
It was a wild ride. I had to take 3 for my program. So it was interesting. It was interesting to be thrown into that world. And I very clearly realized that, no, an academic pursuit is not for me. Because thinking about being a professor and having to publish and things, to get tenure, I was like, no, ma'am.
Wow.
That was not going to happen for me. So then the other 2 kind of not class-related aspects of programs are the comprehensive exam and the thesis.
Yeah, I don't know anything about a comprehensive exam.
Yeah, so this is not anything that I knew until I started applying. And every program is different. So the comprehensive exam is really just a way for the school to summarize your learning, right? So it's either a literal exam that you have to sit down and you have to answer questions on craft, on manuscripts that you've read, all those different kind of things. In my program, instead of an actual exam, the comprehensive exam was a 15-page essay.
Okay.
And that was really interesting because we had to write an essay on our thesis without mentioning our thesis.
Oh, wow.
So the way that we did that was we had to pick books that exemplified something that we were tackling in our manuscript.
Okay.
And analyze why those things worked and why we were attracted to those.
Oh, wow.
So I wrote about a Maggie Stiefvater book. I wrote about The Outsiders. And I wrote about a short story, and now the name escapes me. But I had to, talk about found family was basically what I was tackling. But by picking apart each of those.
Oh, I love that.
So that was something that in most programs they'll have you do it's usually in your second year between the first and second semester. So over Christmas break is usually when those things will be due. The thesis, on the other hand, is it's your manuscript.
Yeah.
The goal of an MFA program is that you walk away with a completed or partially completed work that's almost ready for publication.
I should have said that. That is the only other thing I knew about MFAs was at the very least, I would have possibly a finished manuscript and the capacity to do it, because I am, as you said, in this bubble. Nothing else is a distraction. It's deadlines, which I love deadlines.
Me too.
Yeah, and just I accountability in a way that I don't have now as someone who's just pursuing it on his own. Is truly, when I look back and think about should I have done it, should I do it now, is something that is still very attractive to me is the possibility of having the time to have a very close to complete manuscript.
Right. And I think that's why a lot of people end up going into their MFA program later on.
Yeah.
My friend, and she won't mind that I'm talking about her, my friend who's going to school in New York right now, she was my colleague. And, as we were editing books after books after books, she kind of said to me, do you ever have time to write? And I said, I have the time, but I just don't. It was just one of those things, I haven't written for pleasure in a long time. And she was like, I'm really considering quitting my job and going into my MFA program and coming out with my poetry chapbook.
Wow.
That I've been putting off for years. Yeah. And I was kind of like, go for it. Like, you know, if you can make it happen, make it happen. I worked while I got my MFA degree, not full time, but I had like 3 part-time jobs.
Nice. Oh, so you were working full time.
Yeah. And that's kind of like, I was making money because I had to, but I was able to do it in a way that allowed me to focus on my classes. Yeah. So I think it is that it's different from getting your bachelor's, where I feel like, I don't know if this was the culture on your campus, but on my campus, you know, if you were kind of outside the traditional timeline for getting your bachelor's, people kind of side-eyed you. Like, why are you here? You know, what are you doing here as a 40 or 50-year-old? Yes. And like the rest of us are like in our like very early 20s. Yes.
Yes. I had a in my undergrad, I had a fellow student who I loved. She was such a sweet soul, and she felt very insecure about the fact that she was in her 40s pursuing her creative writing degree. And we kind of were like, don't worry about that. Like, don't worry about that. And I feel is a reason why I hesitate to do it now as someone who's no longer in his 20s. I don't care about that, but that like I would worry about feeling isolated.
Right. Yeah. And that, I will say, that is something that's very different in an MFA program.
Okay, good.
It was actually that I was the oddball, because
Oh, right.
And they did say my first year, they were like, you're the baby.
Oh, wow.
So I was significantly younger. I think I was at least 5 years younger than the next person.
Okay.
Which was fine.
Yeah,
like,
of course.
It wasn't like they singled me out and they were like, oh, you don't know how to write, or like whatever. But it was just a totally different attitude. Mm-hmm. You know, you had people coming from corporate careers. You had people coming from nonprofit careers. You had people who had been publishing and like putting on stage plays for years. And they were just like, you know, I really want to be in an environment where I can sit down and just write this one thing. And I did have a friend who, that was his whole goal in the program. He's like, I know exactly what I want to write, and I'm here to write it. And that was his thesis. And then he got it published.
No way.
I think the year after we graduated, I think.
I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So he was like, I'm here to do a thing. And then he did the thing.
I
was just kind of like, I have no idea why I'm here. I'm just showing up.
Just straight up vibes. Yeah.
Yep. So I think that is something that I really appreciated about the MFA program. And oddly, a lot of lawyers.
Okay, I actually was going to ask you that, because that's the other advice. If you're an undergrad English student, I don't know if you heard this a lot, but I heard a lot like, well, consider law school. I was like, why? And what about me screams law? But like, a lot of English students decide to get a law degree, and a lot of law students, I've heard, go for their MFA in creative or in writing.
And that is like, it was so strange to me to see that, especially because my partner, at that time, his track was going to be a lawyer. Mm-hmm. You know, he was studying the LSAT. He got his master's degree in public policy, but he was taking law classes from the law school at his university at the same time. And he was like, you should go to law school with me when you're done with your MFA. And I was like, absolutely not.
I love you, but no.
And he was like, you don't even have to do the bar. Like, and I was like, no.
Then why would I do it? Well, I shouldn't say that. We have a contributor who has done that. And
oh, yeah.
It's brilliant. I could not do it.
Yeah, you guys should definitely pick up, if you haven't already, the January-February issue. We do have a brilliant article in there about how going to law school can make you a better business savvy writer.
Yeah, and it's brilliant.
I know this is a lot of information to take in, everybody. I hope that this chat has answered some of your questions, but if it hasn't, don't worry about it. Michael and I are going to continue this conversation in our February episode, so stay tuned for part 2.